I still vividly remember our wedding day. It was a clear, sunny day, with the golden sunlight shining as if blessing our love. David and I had been together for over 3 years before deciding to marry. He was a man with ambition, a devoted husband. At least, that's what I once believed. In the early days of our marriage, we lived in complete happiness. Every morning when I woke up, I would see him smiling, kissing my forehead and whispering, "I love you." I believed I had found the perfect partner, someone who would walk with me through the long journey ahead. David worked at a large financial company where competition was fierce. Even though he came home late sometimes, I always understood and supported his career. I believed that with hard work, he would achieve everything he wanted through his own abilities. But little did I know, there were things David was willing to sacrifice, even me. As time passed, David began to change. At first, it was just small things, secretive texts, phone calls that he would immediately end when I approached. Then, there were the late nights, and the increasingly indifferent hugs. I convinced myself that perhaps he was just under pressure from work, that I was being too sensitive. But as the distance between us grew, I began to feel a real sense of worry. One day, I decided to confront him directly. "David, is something going on? I feel like you're not the same as before." "It's nothing, my love. Just a lot of pressure at work," he replied without looking me in the eye. A wife's intuition told me something wasn't right. I started paying closer attention. His clothes sometimes had a strange perfume scent. His phone was always locked with a password, and whenever a message came in, he quickly hid it. But what made me most anxious was how often he talked about his boss, Mr. Richard. "What's your boss like?" I asked one time when we were having dinner. "He's very powerful. A person who can decide the fate of employees with just one word. If you make him happy, the opportunities for promotion are limitless." David spoke with admiration and a strange anxiety in his voice. I felt something was off in the way he spoke about this man. But I didn't want to doubt my husband, so I brushed aside the uneasy feeling in my heart. One evening, David came home looking excited. "My love, this weekend the company is hosting a big party. Mr. Richard will be there. I want you to come with me." I was a bit surprised since he rarely asked me to attend company events. But I gladly agreed, thinking this would be a good opportunity to understand more about my husband's work environment. That evening, I wore a simple black dress, light makeup. When he saw me, David smiled with satisfaction. "You look beautiful." We arrived at the party at a luxurious hotel. As soon as we walked in, I felt the atmosphere of wealth and power enveloping us. Men in expensive suits, women with mysterious smiles, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air, accompanying conversations full of ambition. Then I met Richard, David's boss. He was a man in his 50s, with a confident, commanding presence. When David introduced me, he smiled, shook my hand firmly, and said, "David has spoken a lot about you. A beautiful and intelligent woman. He's really lucky." I smiled politely, but his gaze made me uneasy. Throughout the party, I noticed that Richard kept trying to stay close to me. His suggestive words, his seemingly accidental touches made me increasingly uncomfortable. David noticed too, but instead of being upset, he just chuckled and continued chatting with others. A strange feeling started to grow in my heart, but I didn't yet realize that this was the beginning of a real nightmare. The days after the party were a blur of confusion and disbelief. I couldn't stop replaying the events in my mind. Richard's lingering gaze, the subtle touches that seemed too intimate for a simple work event, and David's casual attitude as if nothing unusual had happened. My heart ached, and yet, I kept telling myself that I must be overreacting. Surely, there was a reasonable explanation, but deep down, I knew something had changed. The trust one had in David, the man I had built my life with, was now shattered. The days following the party were filled with strange tension. David came home later than usual, his excuses for the long hours at work becoming more frequent. I tried to confront him several times, but each time, he deflected the conversation or brushed me off with a simple, "I'm just busy, babe." I hated myself for feeling so paranoid, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Richard had made it clear that he had spoken to David about me. The way he looked at me, the way his words hung in the air, it all felt like a warning sign. Was this the beginning of something I couldn't stop? I decided to take matters into my own hands. If David wasn't going to be open with me, I would find out for myself. It was a Friday night when it happened. David was running late, as usual. I decided to follow him. I wasn't sure what I hoped to find, but I had to know the truth. I waited until he left the office, then quietly got into my car and followed him. My heart raced as I kept a safe distance behind him, trying to remain unnoticed. David's car took several turns, and my nerves grew with each passing minute. He drove through the city, heading toward a neighborhood I didn't recognize. I had never seen him go this way before. My instincts were screaming at me to stop, but I couldn't. I had to know where he was going. Finally, we arrived at a large upscale building. It was a hotel, one of the most expensive in the city. My stomach churned as I parked my car a few blocks away, trying to keep an eye on the entrance. I watched as David got out of his car, adjusting his suit and looking around. He walked toward the entrance with a sense of purpose, his steps quick but confident. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I knew then that something was very wrong. The unease that had been building up over the past few weeks now felt like a wave crashing over me. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew I had to find out. I waited for what felt like an eternity before deciding to follow him inside. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Stepping out of my car, I adjusted my coat, trying to calm my nerves. I followed David into the hotel, keeping a distance as he made his way to the elevator. I could feel my heart beating in my chest loud and fast. I stepped into the lobby, scanning the room for any signs of what might be happening. And then I saw it. David was standing in front of the elevator, talking to someone. It wasn't just anyone. It was Richard. I froze in place, my stomach sinking. There they were standing so close, speaking in hushed tones. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw the way Richard touched David's shoulder, a gesture that seemed all too familiar. The two men exchanged a look, one that seemed almost conspiratorial. I could feel the anger and betrayal bubbling inside me. David was smiling, his expression one I hadn't seen in weeks, carefree, almost eager. He wasn't acting like the man I had married. He was acting like someone else. And in that moment, I realized that I was no longer part of the equation. I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as the two men entered the elevator together. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing, but my gut told me that I was about to learn something I wasn't prepared for. When the elevator doors closed, I had a choice to make. I could turn around and walk away, pretending I hadn't seen anything. Or, I could follow them and confront the truth, no matter how painful it would be. I chose the latter. I quickly took the stairs to the next floor, my mind racing with thoughts of what I was about to uncover. I had no idea where they were going, but I had to find out. I moved quickly through the hallway, staying close to the walls to avoid being seen. And then I saw them, David and Richard, standing outside a door. I could hear laughter coming from the room. The sound was so casual, so carefree. It made my stomach twist in knots. I didn't think. I just acted. I walked toward them, my body trembling with every step. When David saw me, his expression faltered for a split second. He looked genuinely surprised, almost startled. But then his face went cold, as if he had prepared for this moment. Richard, on the other hand, didn't seem shocked at all. He just smiled, a smug, knowing smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Lena," David said, his voice uncharacteristically flat. "What are you doing here?" "Don't lie to me, David," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. "I know what's going on. I followed you. I saw everything." David looked away, and for the first time, I saw the guilt in his eyes. But instead of apologizing or explaining himself, he simply said, "This is the only way I can get ahead. You wouldn't understand." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the weight of them settle in my chest, suffocating me. "You've been using me," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You've been using me to get ahead." David didn't respond. Richard stepped forward, his expression full of smug superiority. "We both agreed, Lena. Your husband is a man of ambition, and I'm helping him get what he deserves. Isn't that what you want for him?" But the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. The man I thought I loved had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I didn't even recognize him anymore. He wasn't the man who had promised to love and cherish me. He was someone else. Someone who would do anything to climb the ladder of success, no matter who got hurt along the way. With a final bitter glance at both of them, I turned and walked away, my heart breaking with every step I took. I had learned the truth, but it wasn't the truth I had hoped for. And as I left that hotel, I knew I had reached a crossroads. I could no longer stay in a marriage built on lies and betrayal. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I couldn't think straight. Everything that had been building up for weeks, maybe even months, finally came crashing down in a single overwhelming wave. The betrayal. The lies. David, the man I thought I knew, had used me as a pawn in his quest for power. And Richard, his boss, had treated me like a mere tool to be manipulated. I didn't even know what I was feeling anymore. Anger? Yes. Hurt? Absolutely. But what hurt the most was the realization that I had been blind. I had been so consumed by our life together, by the idea of our perfect marriage, that I ignored every warning sign. I ignored the whispers in my mind that told me something wasn't right. And now it was too late. When I got home, the house felt empty. The silence seemed to weigh down on me, pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had always prided myself on our home being a sanctuary, a place where we could be ourselves and escape the outside world. But now it felt like a prison, a cold, lonely place where the man I once trusted no longer existed. David wasn't home yet. He had called earlier, asking if I wanted to meet for dinner, but I couldn't even look at him. How could I sit across from the man who had sold me out, who had sacrificed our love, our trust, for a chance at a promotion? How could I sit there and pretend everything was okay? I didn't answer his call. I didn't respond to his texts. I didn't want to hear his excuses or his justifications. I had heard enough lies. What I needed now was clarity. I needed to think. I spent the rest of the evening pacing around the house, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do now? What was left for me? I couldn't stay in a marriage where betrayal was the foundation. But I also couldn't imagine leaving him, walking away from everything we had built together. I kept thinking about the life we had once shared, the laughter, the late-night talks, the promises we made to each other. But that life was gone. It was all just a facade, a lie. Around 10 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of David's car pulling into the driveway. I felt a wave of nausea hit me, but I forced myself to calm down. This was it. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. He walked in through the door, his usual warm smile fading when he saw the look on my face. He didn't even have to ask. He could tell something was wrong, but I wasn't going to make it easy for him. I wasn't going to allow him to slide by with his charm and his half-hearted apologies. Not this time. I stood in the living room, my arms crossed tightly over my chest, my gaze fixed on the floor. I could hear the silence between us, thick and suffocating. Where have you been? I asked, my voice sharp. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to hear his answer, but I had to ask. You were with him, weren't you? Richard. David flinched, and I could see the guilt flash in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. Don't bother with the lies. I saw everything, David. I saw you. I saw you with him at the hotel. I followed you. I saw how you looked at him, how you smiled at him, how you didn't care that I was being used like a piece of property. David didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at me as if trying to read my face. Then, he sighed deeply and walked toward me. Lena, he started, his voice low, almost apologetic. I didn't want you to find out like this. I laughed bitterly, the sound more like a sob. You didn't want me to find out? Well, guess what, David? I did. And now I know everything. You've been using me to climb the corporate ladder. I wasn't your partner, your wife. I was just a stepping stone, a tool for your success. David's face tightened, and I could see the anger building in him. But instead of defending himself, he lowered his gaze, as if ashamed. I never wanted to hurt you, Lena. This is about my career. You don't understand. No, David. I interrupted, shaking my head. I understand perfectly. You're not the man I married. You're not the man I thought you were. You've sacrificed everything for a chance at power. And now I'm the one left in the wreckage. I could feel my heart breaking as I spoke those words. It was like I was grieving the loss of a person I had never truly known. The man I loved, the man who had promised to cherish and protect me, was gone, replaced by someone else. Someone who would stop at nothing to get ahead. For a moment, there was silence between us, and I could see the tears welling up in David's eyes. But I didn't care. I couldn't care anymore. He had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive him. I took a deep breath and walked toward the door, grabbing my purse and jacket. David's voice caught me just as I reached the hallway. Lena, please don't go. We can work this out. I'll fix it. Just give me a chance. I stopped in my tracks, my back to him. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but it didn't move me. It didn't matter anymore. No, David. I can't do this anymore. I can't live with a man who thinks nothing of throwing me away for his career. I can't be part of a marriage that's built on lies and manipulation. I'm done. And with that, I walked out the door. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, and I felt a strange sense of relief. It was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I had made a decision. I had chosen myself. I had chosen my own dignity and self-respect over a life of deceit. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time in a long while, I felt free.